There is a place on Earth where a single navigational error can shake the global economy.
Not a battlefield, not a stock exchange. A stretch of water 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, tucked between the southern coast of Iran and the rocky tip of Oman.
From the air, it looks almost unremarkable: blue water, desert coastline, the occasional flash of sunlight on a hull. But look closer at what moves through it. Every single day, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through this corridor. That is 21% of the world's total petroleum supply. 1/5 of all liquefied natural gas traded globally flows through the same channel. The lights of Tokyo, the heating systems of Paris, the fuel that moves cargo from Shanghai to Rotterdam, all of it depends on this water remaining open. This is the Strait of Hormuz, not a choke point in the metaphorical sense, a literal yoke around the throat of the world's energy system. Remove it, and the circulatory system of the global economy begins to fail within days. But the geography that makes Hormuz irreplaceable also makes it treacherous. Beneath the surface, coral reefs and shifting sandbars carve the navigable channel down to 2 lanes, each barely 3 kilometers wide. Supertankers, carrying 300,000 tons of crude, have almost no margin for error. They hug the Iranian coastline, moving at slow speed, their hulls separated from shallow water by distances measured not in miles but in meters. The pilots who navigate these ships do not speak of Hormuz the way geographers do. They speak of it the way surgeons speak of operating near the spine.
One wrong move here, and the world feels it.
But within this same strait, barely 8 kilometers from the Iranian coastline, sits an island that looks like it belongs on another planet entirely. Hormuz Island greets you not with palm trees or white sand. It greets you with red, a deep, oxidized, almost violent red that covers the beaches, the cliffs, the ground beneath your feet. The iron oxide concentration in this soil is among the highest on Earth. When waves roll across the shoreline and retreat, they leave behind a crimson stain in the foam, a phenomenon locals have always called the bleeding waves. Standing here at sunrise, the water turning dark rose against the red earth. It becomes difficult to convince yourself you are still on this planet. Move inland, and the landscape shifts again. The Rainbow Valley opens without warning, a geological fever dream of yellow sulfur deposits, white salt crystallizations, and ochre sedimentary bands layered across the hillside like brushstrokes from a painter with no interest in subtlety. Geologists classify this island as one of the most mineralogically complex salt domes on Earth. Travelers simply stand and stare. This otherworldly terrain conceals a history of extraordinary wealth. In the 16th century, Hormuz Island was not a remote curiosity. It was one of the most strategically coveted trading posts on the planet. Spices from India, silk from Persia, pearls from the Gulf, all of it passed through this small island's harbor. Portuguese navigators understood its value immediately. In 1507, Afonso de Albuquerque seized the island by force and built a fortress that still stands today, its stones slowly surrendering to salt, air, and time. The ruins say everything about empires, how completely they can dominate a place and how completely they can disappear from it. The Portuguese are gone, the spice routes have shifted, but the red earth remains, indifferent to every civilization that has come to claim it. And beneath these ancient shores, something else has survived, quieter, older, and far more fragile. It has no fortress walls, no recorded history of conquest. Its only defense is the extraordinary patience of biology itself. Along the northern coastline of the strait, where the desert meets the sea in a tangle of roots and brackish water, the Hara mangrove forest grows. UNESCO designated this region a biosphere reserve, not as a formality, but as an acknowledgement of something genuinely rare, a functioning green lung in one of the most arid, industrially pressured, marine environments on the planet. The mangroves of Hara perform a quiet miracle. Their root systems filter salt directly from seawater, processing what would kill almost any other plant and converting it into shelter, oxygen, and food. Beneath the surface, juvenile fish find protection in the root labyrinth. Above, herons and ospreys hunt in silence. The forest does not announce itself. It simply persists, filtering, breathing, sheltering, while the supertankers pass on the horizon. "30 kilometers south, Hengam Island offers a different kind of wonder. The beaches here do not merely reflect light, they generate it. Sheets of mica embedded in the sand catch the sun at every angle, turning the shoreline into a surface of shifting silver mirrors. Walk here at midday, and your shadow falls across what looks like broken moonlight underfoot. But Hengam's most extraordinary residents pay no attention to the geology. Bottlenose dolphins have gathered in these waters for as long as anyone can remember, pods of 30, sometimes 50, moving through the channel with the unhurried confidence of animals that have never needed to recognize a border. The military exclusion zones mean nothing to them. The shipping lanes are simply water. They surface alongside fishing boats, alongside research vessels, occasionally alongside the inflatable dinghies of Coast Guard patrols, indifferent to the political arrangements of the species watching them from above. This indifference is not innocence. It is a different relationship with this place, entirely one measured in thousands of years of uninterrupted presence, not in treaties or territorial claims. And yet the fragility of all of this is not difficult to calculate. The Strait of Hormuz carries more petroleum traffic than any comparable waterway on Earth every day. Dozens of vessels loaded with crude oil navigate these same waters where the dolphins swim and the mangrove roots filter salt. The margin for catastrophe is permanently thin. A grounding, a collision, a deliberate act of sabotage, any of these introduces oil into a system that has no mechanism to process it. The mangroves, which survived millennia of geological upheaval, cannot filter crude. The mica beaches would turn black. The dolphins would not understand what was happening to the water around them. The Hara forest and the shores of Hengam exist in a state of permanent, unacknowledged tension with the industrial apparatus surrounding them. Beautiful, functional, irreplaceable, and entirely at the mercy of the next miscalculation on the water. That calculation grows more complicated as you move west, toward an island that has somehow become both a luxury resort and a military outpost at the same time. Kish does not ease you into its contradictions. It presents them simultaneously, without apology. From the air, Kish Island looks like a promise. White resort towers line the coastline. Shopping malls large enough to contain entire city blocks rise from the flat coral terrain. Swimming pools catch the sun beside turquoise water. Iran designated Kish a free trade zone in the 1970s, and the infrastructure built since then speaks the universal language of consumption, designer, boutiques, water parks, international restaurants, the particular architecture of places designed to make people forget where they actually are. Iranians travel here without the documentation required elsewhere. Foreign visitors arrive without standard visa procedures. On the surface, Kish functions as a pressure valve, a sanctioned space where the rules of the Islamic Republic loosen slightly, where music plays in hotel lobbies and women on the beach move with less surveillance than on the mainland. It has been called the Dubai of Iran, and the comparison is not entirely wrong. Both islands are constructed realities, economies built on the deliberate manufacture of desire. But walk to the northern shore, and the illusion fractures completely. There, half submerged in the shallow water, the Greek ship rusts. A Greek cargo vessel that ran aground in 1966 and was simply left where it stopped. More than half a century of salt water and sun have reduced it to something between a sculpture and a warning, its hull breached, its superstructure collapsing inward, barnacles and rust negotiating over what remains. Tourists photograph it from the beach. Children swim around its corroding hull. Nobody seems troubled by what it represents, that these waters, even at their calmest, have always been capable of ending a voyage permanently. And behind the resort facades, Kish carries a different function entirely. The island sits at a position of considerable strategic value, close enough to the strait's main shipping lanes, to observe, to intercept, to respond. Military infrastructure exists here alongside the hotel pools, radar installations, patrol boat facilities, communications equipment. The electronic surveillance apparatus that monitors vessel movements through the strait operates partially from positions on this island. The music from the hotel terraces carries on the evening wind. Somewhere beyond the reef line, a patrol boat completes another circuit. Both sounds belong to Kish equally. This is the island's truest nature, not luxury, not military base, but the unsettling space where those two realities have learned to coexist without acknowledging each other. The strait has always demanded this kind of double vision from those who live beside it. But there is one small piece of rock in these waters that understood this better than anywhere else, a place where an entire empire's nervous system once ran through a single cable on the ocean floor. Telegraph Island appears on modern maps as a footnote, a tiny outcrop in the Musandam fjords, barely large enough to name. But in the 1860s, this unremarkable rock occupied one of the most critical positions in the British Empire's global communications network. The Indo-European Telegraph Company laid submarine cables through the Gulf in 1864, and Telegraph Island became the relay station connecting London to Karachi and Bombay. Every dispatch, every order, every piece of intelligence moving between the British government and its Indian administration passed through this outpost. For a brief period, the entire nervous system of an empire ran through a building smaller than a provincial post office, sitting in the middle of one of the most hostile marine environments on Earth. The men stationed here did not volunteer for the posting. Summer temperatures on the island regularly exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. The humidity was absolute. There was no shade worth speaking of, no fresh water, no relief from the sun that beat down on exposed coral rock from dawn until well after dark. Supply ships came infrequently. Communication with the outside world was, with bitter irony, limited, despite the island's entire purpose being communication. Months of this produced a specific kind of psychological deterioration. British naval records from the period document a pattern of behavioral breakdown among stationed personnel, anxiety, paranoia, dissociation, a progressive loosening of rational thought that the sailors described with a phrase that has since entered the English language permanently. They called it going round the bend. The bend, in this case, was the curve in the Musandam Channel where Telegraph Island disappeared from the sight of passing ships and from the sight of the world entirely. The cables were eventually rerouted. The station was abandoned. The buildings collapsed over decades into rubble and salt. What remains today is a ruin of stones at the waterline, visited occasionally by tourists on dhow boats who photograph it without knowing its name. The Empire forgot this island. The island, in its own way, never forgot the Empire. Move south from these waters, past the strait's narrowest point, and the geology stops being background. It becomes the story itself. The Musandam Peninsula belongs to Oman, but exists as an exclave, a piece of territory separated from the rest of the country by the United Arab Emirates, jutting northward into the strait like a broken fist of limestone. From the air, it looks like a mountain range that simply continued walking into the sea and forgot to stop. The peaks did not gradually slope down to a coastline. They fell, vertically, directly into water that turns from pale turquoise at the shallows to absolute darkness within meters of the cliff base. There are no roads into most of Musandam's interior fjords. The only way to reach them is by dhow, the traditional wooden boats that have worked these waters for centuries, their diesel engines now doing the work that sails once did. Moving through the Musandam fjords by dhow is an experience that resists easy description. The cliffs rise 300, 400, sometimes 600 meters on either side. The channel narrows until the sky above becomes a thin strip of blue between walls of limestone. Sound behaves differently here. The engine echo returns from multiple directions simultaneously. The water is so clear that the anchor rope disappears into visible depth long before it reaches the bottom. This landscape was not carved by water. It was created by collision. Approximately 70 million years ago, the Arabian tectonic plate drove beneath the Eurasian plate with enough force to push ancient ocean floor thousands of meters upward. What were once coral reefs and seabeds became mountain peaks. The limestone walls of the Musandam fjords are, geologically speaking, former ocean floor compressed, folded, and elevated to heights that now overlook the very sea they once formed the bottom of. The proof sits at the summit of Jebel Harim, Musandam's highest peak at 2,087 meters. Embedded in the rock at the top of this mountain, clearly visible to anyone who looks carefully, are coral fossils and marine shell impressions. A sea cemetery at altitude. The ocean reached here once, hundreds of millions of years ago, and left its dead behind when the plates moved and the rock rose, and the world rearranged itself into its current configuration. Stand at that summit with coral fossils beneath your boots and the actual living sea visible far below, and the timescale of this place becomes genuinely difficult to hold in the mind. The stone remembers what the maps have already forgotten. And so do the hands. Along the Iranian shore of the strait, in the port town of Laft on Keshem Island, a skyline rises that has nothing to do with the 21st century. Dozens of wind towers badgers stand above the rooftops, their open mouths facing north to catch the prevailing breeze, channeling air downward through the structure and out through lower vents, creating a continuous cooling current that requires no electricity, no refrigerant, no moving parts. Only geometry and the reliable physics of hot air displacement. These towers have been functioning in this region for over 1,000 years. The engineers who designed the first ones understood fluid dynamics before the vocabulary to describe it existed. They solved a problem: how to remain alive in temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius without mechanical assistance, through careful observation of wind patterns and an intuitive understanding of how air behaves when confined and directed. The solution they arrived at still works. Walk into a badger-cooled room on a day when the outside air is punishing, and the temperature difference is immediate and startling. No blueprints survive. The knowledge transferred through demonstration and repetition, master to apprentice, generation to generation. This is the architecture of inherited memory. The same principle governs the boat builders of Laft and the surrounding coastal villages. The Lenge, a traditional wooden sailing vessel that UNESCO recognizes as an element of intangible cultural heritage, is constructed without a single technical drawing. No digital model, no engineering software, no written specifications. The master builder carries the entire vessel in his mind. Hull curvature, timber selection, the precise angle of each joint, all of it exists as embodied knowledge, accumulated over decades of practice and passed down through direct instruction. A master builder might spend 30 years learning before being trusted to lead a commission. The vessels they produce have crossed the Arabian Sea to India and down the East African coast for centuries, carrying dates, pearls, and frankincense along trade routes that predate the nations that now border them. Beyond the port, the landscape offers its own form of ancient craft. The Shazami rock labyrinth rises from the Keshm interior columns and formations sculpted by millennia of wind and rain into shapes that resist rational categorization. Local tradition has filled these formations with stories of spirits and divine presence. The geology provides the forms. The imagination of successive generations provides the meaning. Both the Badger Towers and the Lenge builders operate on the same principle. The most durable solutions are those refined by centuries of use, rather than invented in a single moment of inspiration. Some knowledge cannot be written down. It can only be continued. At the northernmost tip of the Musandam Peninsula, one community has been continuing something for centuries that the rest of the world does not fully understand and cannot replicate. Kumzar sits at the end of a fjord, with no road connecting it to anywhere. There has never been a road. The cliffs surrounding the village on three sides make overland access a geological impossibility, and the community has apparently never considered this a problem worth solving. The only way in is by boat, a 40-minute crossing from Kasab through waters that can turn rough without warning, through fjord walls that close in until the village appears suddenly at the dead end of the inlet, white buildings stacked against the cliff face like something placed there by a civilization that ran out of flat ground. Approximately 3,500 people live here. They have always lived here. And in the course of that uninterrupted habitation, something linguistically extraordinary occurred. The language spoken in Kumzari, exists nowhere else on Earth. It belongs to the Iranian language family at its grammatical core, but centuries of contact with Arabic traders, Portuguese navigators, British naval personnel, and Indian merchants left sedimentary layers of borrowed vocabulary that accumulated and fused into something entirely new. Linguists classify it as a contact language of exceptional complexity. Locals simply call it their language. It is transmitted exclusively through speech, parent to child, generation to generation, with no written form and no institutional protection. It survives because the community survives, and for no other reason. The isolation that created this linguistic phenomenon continues to define daily life. Fishermen here maintain rhythms unchanged across generations. Nets spread to dry on the rocky shoreline, catch sorted by hand, boats maintained with the same practical attention their grandfathers applied. In the early morning, before the heat settles, the village moves at a pace that belongs to a different century entirely. But lift your eyes from the shoreline, and the 21st century is immediately visible. Naval vessels, Iranian, American, British, Emirati, depending on the week and the current diplomatic temperature, move through the outer waters with the slow, deliberate presence of floating institutions. Their radar equipment sweeps continuously. Their communications systems monitor everything in range. The fishermen of Kumzar repair their nets beneath this surveillance without apparent concern. They were here before the warships. In all likelihood, they understand they will be here after. The language carries the memory of every empire that passed through these waters and left traces behind. None of them stayed. But the current ones show no signs of leaving. The military presence in the Strait of Hormuz is not subtle. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates fast attack craft, small, agile vessels capable of speeds exceeding 70 knots that conduct regular intercept maneuvers against commercial shipping passing through the strait. These boats move in coordinated swarms, a tactical doctrine specifically designed to overwhelm the defensive response of larger, slower warships. Along the Iranian coastline, Noor anti-ship missile batteries occupy positions with direct firing solutions across the main navigational channels. Beneath the surface, Iran maintains an inventory of naval mines, including sophisticated variants that rest dormant on the seabed until activated by acoustic or magnetic signatures matching specific vessel profiles. This is not speculation. These assets have been photographed, documented, and analyzed by every major naval intelligence service on the planet. They exist. They are maintained. They represent a credible capability to deny passage through the strait to commercial traffic within hours of a political decision to do so. The strategic chessboard operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Iranian patrol vessels conduct boarding inspections of commercial tankers, sometimes detaining vessels for days under disputed legal justifications. American, British, and French naval assets shadow these operations, maintaining presence without direct confrontation. The communications channels between these forces carry a continuous undercurrent of challenge and counter-challenge. Requests for vessel identification that go unanswered, warnings issued simultaneously by opposing parties, radio traffic designed as much to signal resolve as to convey information. For the crews aboard commercial vessels navigating this environment, the psychological pressure is difficult to overstate. A supertanker captain transiting the strait receives simultaneous radio communications from Iranian Naval Command, from the United States Fifth Fleet, from the vessel's own company security protocols, and occasionally from unidentified sources issuing instructions that contradict all three. The captain must make navigational decisions in real time, in a channel with almost no room for error, while managing a crew watching military vessels maneuver at close quarters. Insurance premiums for Hormuz transit have reflected this reality for years. The consequences of a serious incident here extend far beyond the strait itself. Oil markets respond to perceived supply risk faster than any other commodity. A single tanker seizure adds measurable percentage points to global crude prices within hours of the news reaching trading floors. A partial closure of the strait, even a temporary disruption lasting 72 hours, would trigger emergency reserve releases from strategic petroleum stockpiles in the United States, Europe, and Japan, measures reserved for genuine supply crises. The arithmetic translates directly into daily life at a distance of thousands of kilometers. A sustained crisis at Hormuz means higher fuel costs in Tokyo, elevated electricity prices in Paris, more expensive transport across Southeast Asia. The person filling a motorbike with petrol in Hanoi is financially connected to the decisions made by naval commanders in a body of water they may never see. The strait does not announce this connection, it simply enforces it. Every tanker that passes without incident is an act of collective restraint by parties with profound and conflicting interests. The passage has held, so far, because the cost of closing it remains higher than the cost of keeping it open. So far, And perhaps that is the most honest way to end a story about a place that has never permitted easy conclusions. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. In that distance, everything converges. Iron-red beaches and coral fossils lifted to mountain summits, a language spoken nowhere else on Earth. Wine towers that have cooled homes for 1,000 years without consuming a single watt. The ruins of an empire that went mad from isolation. Dolphins that recognize no maritime boundary. Fishermen who have outlasted every navy that ever patrolled their waters. And beneath all of it, the permanent tension of a world that runs on what moves through here. This is not simply a shipping lane, it is the place where the ancient and the urgent have always occupied the same water. Where a civilization's accumulated wisdom in stone, in language, in the hands of a boat builder who needs no drawings, exists within radar range of missile batteries pointed at the world's most valuable cargo. Every tanker that passes adds one more transit to a count that has continued unbroken for decades. Every passage is, in its own quiet way, a negotiation between the forces that want this strait open and the forces that retain the power to close it. The balance holds not because the underlying conflicts have been resolved, but because all parties have so far calculated that the cost of disruption exceeds the benefit. That calculation could change. It has come close before, but the red earth of Hormuz Island will remain after whatever comes next. The coral fossils on Jebel Harim's summit will still record an ocean that existed before any of the current disputes were imaginable. The Kumzari language will continue carrying its compressed history of every contact and collision these waters have witnessed. The Badger Towers will keep catching wind. The strait does not belong to any of the powers that claim authority over it. It belongs, in the deepest sense, to the long history of human movement across water, the spice traders, the pearl divers, the telegraph operators going slowly mad in the heat, the fishermen of Kumzar mending nets at dawn. They were all here before the warships. The warships will pass, the water remains. This is the Strait of Hormuz, not as the news describes it, but as it truly is. Ancient, contested, irreplaceable. A place where the future of the world is decided, one voyage at a time.